Several years ago, Mars Hill put on an art exhibition about the search for peace in a broken world. One of the artists included a quotation from Mohandas Gandhi. During the show, a visitor stuck a note next to the Gandhi quotation. The note read, "Reality check, Gandhi's in hell." The note pulled Rob Bell up short. Really? He recalls thinking. Gandhi's in hell? He is? We have confirmation of this? Someone knows this without a doubt? And that someone has decided to take on the responsibility of letting the rest of us know? This story begins Bell's new bestseller titled Love Wins, a book about heaven, hell, and the fate of every person who has ever lived. In it, Bell suggests that every person who ever lived might end up in heaven, whatever heaven turns out to be. Bell's dalliance with the idea of universal salvation, viewed by most Christians as heresy, has provoked a firestorm of criticism. If Gandhi's in heaven, then why bother with accepting Christ, Bell's critics say. If you say the Bible doesn't really say what a lot of people have said it says, then where does that stop? If the verses about hell and judgment aren't literal, what about the ones on adultery, say, or homosexuality? Indeed. On the other hand, even if you do take the Bible literally, you still have no end of questions. Some time ago, the journalist Stephen Henderson related a story in Civilization magazine about spending a weekend in the country with friends. On Sunday morning, as Henderson tells the story, while his hosts and their other guests were still asleep, he slipped out to a service at the local Episcopal church. When he returned, everybody was sipping coffee and deeply worshiping the Sunday papers. He immediately sensed that his absence had been discussed, a suspicion that was confirmed soon enough. "What did you learn in church?" someone asked in that sing-song voice adults use when addressing toddlers. 40 days have passed since Easter, Henderson replied. The priest spoke about Christ's ascension. At which point, another person wondered aloud, "When Jesus ascended, did he float up gradually like a hot air balloon? Or did he blast off like the space shuttle?" Fortunately for Henderson, he had the good sense to respond to the question about Christ's ascension by asking, "What's for breakfast?" On Easter, a lot of people ask similar questions. What's for brunch? Lamb or duck? What color are the Easter eggs? How cute are the bunnies? These questions sidestep the provocation that lies at the heart of the Easter story. Taken on its own terms, the story of the Christ hangs on his immaculate conception and his resurrection. Rob Bell's critics have a point. Ultimately, either you accept the tradition as presented in the Christian New Testament, or you don't. Either the story of the Christ is a supernatural story that happened once and changed all of human history forever, or the story of Jesus is a human story that keeps happening over and over. The best stories don't happen once and never again. They repeat. Easter is about the worst day of your life and what comes after it. For his part, Rob Bell remains undeterred by the controversy over his suggestion that everyone might eventually end up in heaven. Something new is in the air, he insists. Well, not exactly. Universalism, the conviction that all of us share the same destiny, whatever that may be, has been around for many centuries. So has Unitarianism, the conviction that all of us, including Jesus of Nazareth, came from the same source, whatever that may be. As a Unitarian Universalist congregation, our approach at All Souls is to take everything we know into account before we decide what to believe. Knowledge comes first, belief follows. Once you know the facts, and in the modern world there's only one set of facts, then you can decide what purposes you will pursue. Knowledge is about facts, belief is about purpose. Our mission as a congregation is to learn everything we can about ourselves and our world in order to make worthy decisions about how we ought to live. Albert Mohler, Jr., president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, thinks what we're doing at All Souls is a waste of time. When you adopt universalism and erase the distinction between the church and the world, he says, then you don't need the church, and you don't need Christ, and you don't need the cross. Mohler is 2/3 right. If a supernatural God has made the rules and handed them down to humanity, then religion is the process of obeying the rules, complete with the Christ and the cross, not to mention the Virgin. However, if God isn't supernatural and hasn't dictated all the rules in advance, then the church, along with the other elements of religion, becomes even more important. In my view, religion is the process of taking everything we know about the universe into account and creating a life of meaning and purpose within it. And God is the idea that symbolizes all that is possible. Once relieved of the necessity to be magical, Easter can actually become meaningful. It's not a story that happened once and never happened again. Like all great stories, Easter repeats. Easter is about the worst day of your life and what comes after it. The Gospel of Mark says that 3 women visited Jesus' tomb 2 days after he died. They spoke with a young man who told them the tomb was empty. Hearing this news, the Gospel says, the women went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. That's the end. In the earliest manuscripts of the earliest gospel, the story ends here. The women fled, for terror and amazement had seized them. They were afraid. The first thing to know about Easter is that it doesn't begin with the peal of trumpets and a profusion of daffodils. It begins with death and terror, the worst day of your life. Only when you've exhausted your own resources, failed in your own efforts, and depleted your own energies do you begin to look up and reach out. The darkest hour comes just before dawn, when darkness reigns supreme in your life. It's time for Easter. In her poem titled A Short Testament, the contemporary American poet Ann Porter writes, "Whatever harm I may have done in all my life, in all your creation, if I cannot repair it, I beg you to repair it. And then there are all the wounded, the poor, the deaf, the lonely, and the old, whom I have roughly dismissed as if I were not one of them. Where I have wronged them by it and cannot make amends, I ask you to comfort them to overflowing. And where there are lives I may have withered around me, or lives of strangers far and near that I've destroyed in blind complicity, and if I cannot find them or have no way to serve them, remember them. I beg you to remember them when winter is over, and all your unimaginable promises burst into song on death's bare branches." Easter is about the worst day of your life and the unimaginable promise of the day that comes after it. Yes, Easter is about the harm you have blithely done, and the people you have roughly dismissed, and the lives of strangers you may have destroyed. But Easter is also about your worst day not being the final day of your life. In the face of death's bare branches, Easter proclaims that winter is over. Today begins a new season, a season of unimaginable promise. Today, your life too can burst into song. Amen. I love you. Happy Easter, and may God bless us all.